Hello everyone, my name is Jack Hardman. I am a PhD student at Newcastle University looking at integrating informatics techniques into studying animal behaviour. Today I'll be talking about using GPS telemetry data to look at behaviour of invasive green monkeys on the Caribbean island of St Kitts. The technology used to track and monitor movement has advanced massively in the last decade. These advances have allowed tracking techniques to be increasingly integrated into animal studies. This has had massive implications for ecology, conservation, and the study of animal behaviour in general. So we're seeing an increased use of these techniques in an array of animal research, to the point where fantastic sites such as MoveBank have been created. MoveBank, a bit like GenBank, which you might have heard of, which is used to collate data on genes. MoveBank is used to collate tracking data on animals. It makes it easy for anyone to look up tracking data on a species of interest. For instance, here I've typed in cheetah, and you can see that I've already got a few different results, some of which you can click on and see the tracking data on the map straight away, like this one here. So first of all, I'm going to go over a brief background of some of the older techniques used to track animals and how these have improved, and hopefully this should give some insight into how recent advancements have allowed for the studies being done today. So early forms of tracking technology relied on VHF, very high frequency radio waves. These consisted of a transmitter attached to an animal, such as the one you can see attached to the bottom of the hornet there, and a receiver with a directional antenna called a yagi, seen in the picture to the left. So essentially, the researcher will hold the yagi up and see which direction they can get the strongest signal from the transmitter. And that's the direction in which the transmitter will be. So the technique works by using triangulation, where bearings are taken from two or more points, and the intersection of these bearings is where the transmitter will be. So it's not necessarily always a point, it can be an area, depending on the accuracy of the bearings taken, and the animal will be somewhere within that area. They originally used on large fauna, so a lot larger than the one seen on the hornet there. The technology has progressed to be small enough to attach to something like the Asian hornet shown in the picture, where in the UK, giant Asian hornets are tracked with these VHF radio trackers to find their nests so they can be destroyed as they're an invasive species. A large issue with VHF is the need for field workers on the ground. So points can only be taken where and when these field workers are available to go out and track them. Argos, on the other hand, is based on the Doppler effect, so the transmitter attached to the animal seen on the elk there around its neck transmits a signal up to satellites, and the frequency of these radio waves is used to determine the transmitter position. So the Doppler effect, which you might be aware from passing cars or something like that. As the car comes towards you, the sound waves are compressed, resulting in a higher pitch, and as the car moves away, those sound waves become more spaced apart, so the pitch will get lower. So it works by the same way, using radio waves rather than sound waves, but the principle is the same. This example here is from an Argos satellite tracking of an elk. Two famous biologists called the Craighead twins came up with this idea, and you can see how large the collars were on this animal. They weighed somewhere in the region of 10 kilos, and this one in particular, Monique, the space elk, became quite famous in the papers at the time. Global Positioning System, GPS, instead works on the arrival time of signals from two or more satellites to calculate its position. So this determines the distance from each satellite, and then based on the known position of the satellite, works the position of the GPS device itself. This provides a more accurate location than the Argos before. So one important factor to consider is how to retrieve the tracking data set. So you've done your tracking, you've got your data, how do you get it back? So the older resistant systems relied on saving the dataset locally to the collar itself. So data could only be retrieved when you go and capture the animal, take the collar off and download the dataset onto your computer for the researcher. Later, it would progress to be able to be transferred to a receiver. So whenever an animal is near enough to this particular receiver, the data transmits wirelessly, such as this one on the right. And this gives you sort of snapshots of what's happened recently. It doesn't give you a continuous, you can only get whatever's transferred as the animals pass this particular point, but it is better than just collecting at the end of the study. More recently, the data itself can be sent in its raw or pre-processed form to the researcher directly via text or through a website for certain brands of GPS device. So this allows for live analysis and being able to make decisions without waiting for the study to end. For instance, in the study I'm planning to do on Vervet monkeys in the Caribbean, we plan on looking at the live data so we can look at particular sleeping sites, so we can send people out to check those sleeping sites while the study is ongoing, something we couldn't do if we had to download the data locally. So one cool thing I found in my reading was that a paper published back in 2010 noted how the progress made in GPS technology would expand the field of animal behaviour research in the future. I just thought it was really cool and exciting to see how now those predictions are beginning to come true with GPS animal tracking, becoming even more advanced and accessible every year, and the analysis used to get into exactly what's happening with this data is getting more advanced too. So it's generally accepted that tracking devices attached to animals must weigh less than 5% of the body mass of the animal. So this means smaller animals won't be able to handle certain types of tracking device. So this graph on the left here is from 2011, but it demonstrates in birds at least what technologies can be used on what size birds. However, as the tech becomes lighter and smaller, it can be used on smaller birds. So for instance, the satellite GPS, which is listed as only suitable for animals above 22 grams in body weight, can now be used on birds as light as 4 grams. So you can imagine all those points on the graph moving slowly left as we can do more advanced things on smaller and smaller birds. This means that more detailed data sets can be taken of these animals, and different types of studies can be done on smaller animals. In addition, the main bulk of a GPS tracker is the battery. It accounts for the majority of the weight. So reducing the size of other components means that a larger battery can now be used, meaning you can do longer studies, you can leave those collars out for a longer amount of time, and you can get a larger data set. So tracking devices also become a lot cheaper over the years, meaning they're becoming increasingly more accessible and can be used in a variety of studies. Along with this, there's a variety of add-ons that weren't available before, such as activity sensors like accelerometers, which are available and they're used a lot in human studies. So for instance, I've got a Fitbit watch, it's in that, and it can be used in animal studies too to see when they're actually active, when they're moving. And proximity detectors is another thing. So they're used to check when two collars are close to each other. So that can be useful when your GPS isn't particularly accurate, or you're just interested when two animals are interacting closely. Another recent push has come in the form of homemade customizable GPS devices. So services like Arduino and Raspberry Pi are allowing researchers to build and program their own GPS devices with relative ease, allowing them to reduce the cost dramatically and include only the specifications needed for the particular project. So you can design a project, decide exactly what you need in your particular collar and build it yourself, and that will reduce the cost quite dramatically. So for instance, a study I read recently said their collars that they built themselves were somewhere in the range of £100, whereas collars bought off the shelf can be somewhere in the region of thousands. This leads me to the subject of my PhD and the monkey population that we are tracking. So the green monkey, Chlorocebus sabaeus, is native to West Africa. It was introduced to the Caribbean in the 1600s by English, Dutch, French and Portuguese ships likely associated with the slave trade. So they were brought in as pets and they eventually escaped and formed a stable population there. So the monkeys arrived on St. Kitts specifically between 1745 and 1825. And they originally fed on the sugarcane plantations and the fruiting trees in the island, and plantations have since been replaced with small-scale agriculture. This change in landscape and interaction with human land use has led to a very interesting relationship with the local community. Because the monkeys used to raid sugarcane crops, they were widely hunted and often eaten as a regular food source. However, recently many have decided to stop eating them due to their human-like characteristics. So they now act as both a pest to local farms, but also a tourist attraction. This has led to some mixed feelings from the community, some regarding them as an important source of income through tourism, and others regarding them as vengeful and intentionally targeting their farms. So there's been reports in a few papers of farmers who have taken action to stop the monkeys raiding their crops, and then they view them as spiteful and have noticed that potentially they might be targeting their farms more than neighbouring farms. So the main reason that they're interesting to me, at least, is because they're an increasing population of an invasive species. So the monkeys now likely outnumber the human population on the island, and with this limited space to expand into with a widespread human presence, it raises a few interesting questions about what exactly is happening here. So how are they using this limited space? What habitat types are they using? How are they using them? How are they interacting with one another? Obviously, as the population size increases, the amount of space they have available is decreasing, so they're probably coming into contact with each other more and more. And how are they interacting with humans and human land use? So we've already said that they're crop raiding, but how are they expanding into these human areas? Previously, workers looked at estimating the size of the green monkey population. So 10 monkeys were tracked using GPS collars and the home ranges were estimated from this data. A map of habitats across the island was created and home ranges were averaged for each habitat. So you can see on this map here, this is a map of St Kitts, not including Nevis, which would be to the southwest, but includes the 10 different general habitats identified on the island and their locations. And you can also see these greyed out, blacked out areas. They're the home ranges of monkeys, determined using minimum convex polygons, and there should be 10 of them. It can be quite difficult to see, but there is 10 monkeys across the island. And so the home ranges we estimated based on these different habitats, and this was extrapolated across the island to estimate the number of possible troops the island could hold based on these home ranges. This was combined with the average troop number and was used to estimate the population size. So this would not have been possible without the specific GPS tracking technology used here. So you could estimate the population, the home ranges, through observation or camera trapping. This is a lot harder to do and would likely be a lot less accurate. And you have to have an idea of where the monkeys are before you actually start. It would also be incredibly difficult to track them with VHF, so it would require field researchers out in the field doing regular tracking of 10 different monkeys at various locations across the island, which would be incredibly time consuming and wouldn't give you the fine detail that you would get from GPS data that we got here. So through the previous work, there's a large data set on the 10 different monkeys' locations that can be further analysed, and that's something that I've been doing. So far I've been exploring exactly what is possible with this data set, seeing what behavioural and ecological questions we can answer with it. And I've plotted out the general movement patterns of the monkeys. So you can see in this GIF here, that's one example of one monkey. And you can see how it's using these different habitats, going into this agriculture in points, and then coming back to the evergreen forest in the meantime. So we've done that with most of the monkeys just to see some general patterns in their behaviour. So we can look at the different habitats they're travelling through, when they're doing it, and how those patterns change over time. I've also looked at how males leaving their original troops disperse, which habitats they're travelling through and which they stop to sleep in. So for instance, the image on the right shows our rogue monkey, or we've named it our rogue monkey, that travels almost halfway around the entire island. So if you imagine that map of St Kitts before, you can see that it travels following these black and red points all the way around this coast. And I was able to look using the sleeping data, so looking at between certain times when it's moving very little, we can identify these red spots is where it's sleeping, and then the black dots are where it's active. So we can see that it preferred agriculture during the day and generally was sleeping more in the evergreen forest during the night. I'm also looking at how several factors affect movement behaviours using hidden Markov models. So very generally, hidden Markov models attempt to predict a hidden variable, in this case the behavioural mode of the monkey, which in the current model is either entrenched, meaning they're moving very little, or exploratory, where they're going out into the environment and wandering around. So the model aims to predict these using observed variables such as in this case the step number, so the distance between two GPS fixes, and the turning angle, so the bearing from one fix to the other between these GPS points. So we can look at how different factors such as time of day, type of habitat, and other factors affect the likelihood of the monkey changing from one behavioural mode to the other. So as an example, as you would imagine, one trend you can see in this data is a move from entrenched to exploratory behaviour in the early morning, and a move back from exploratory to entrenched in the evening. So I'm currently working on getting some more colours out onto the St Kitts monkeys to expand the current data set and look at how different troops are interacting. So a previous paper by Isbil et al. Has looked at troop interactions and home range overlap using GPS tracking in Kenyan Vervet monkeys. So they use the GPS data to identify intergroup interactions and monitor the results of them. So you can see on this map on the left, there's the 3 different troops and the 3 different colours, and these black areas in between are those overlaps of those home ranges where they saw the interactions, and they were able to tell the sort of interactions that were happening, who was winning these interactions, and some very general behaviour, as in who was approaching and who was retreating during these interactions. So I'm planning to do something similar, but expand upon this by collaring 6 monkeys, 2 monkeys from 3 different troops on St Kitts, and then looking at this data to see if we can find interactions, look at where they are, and look at the behaviour during We can also look at those home range app overlaps. So I'll also be using the hidden Markov's models that I mentioned to see if their behaviour changes at these habitat borders and during these intergroup interactions. I'm also looking at potentially integrating some machine learning techniques to go a little bit further than the hidden Markov models can potentially go, to look further into the behaviour. It's something I'm currently exploring. So these have been used predominantly in human tracking studies so far, these machine learning techniques, but there is a possibility they could be relevant here. It's something I need to explore. And because the population is expanding in a limited space, I expect to see a higher tolerance from home range overlap. So more overlap between the different territories of the animals, and therefore less aggressive interactions, or it could be the complete opposite, in that they get smaller but very highly defended territory boundaries where they're fiercely aggressive over them. So in summary, tracking technology has advanced massively in the last decade. Tracking devices are becoming cheaper, lighter, and more accessible and customizable, and this is allowing more and new research into animal movement ecology to be done. The St. Kitts monkey population is expanding in a limited space with lots of human interaction, and we can use GPS data to estimate behaviours and patterns using a variety of techniques. And these results can be used to better inform policymakers such as those on St. Kitts. I would like to thank the Natural History Society of Northumbria for inviting me to give this talk, and hope you enjoy the rest of the talks. Thank you.